Sounds good. Thanks for the record reminder.
Sure. Kate, did you happen to put those two links in the chat too? That would be great.
Yep.
Thank you. So should I get started then?
Yeah, go for it.
All right. Hi, I'm Nicole. I know a lot of you based on names and little faces of your screensavers. So nice to see a lot of you and nice to meet the rest of you. And thanks for having me, Kate. And as she mentioned tonight, I'm going to kind of just hit on a couple of lessons, a LEAF lesson and a project learning tree lesson. I think I'm going to go fairly quickly through the actual discussion of the lessons so we have a little bit more time to talk about adaptations from them. So I knew that the topic of today's Power Hour had something to do with connection with in terms of team building, and then that made me think about connection to nature and connection in terms of disconnecting from technology, which I think is something that we all really are needing right now. And ironically, my laptop decided to die today. So I guess it was a message from the universe that yes, we really do need to do some more disconnecting. So I picked a couple of lessons that really give students a chance to connect with their surroundings outdoors and to connect with each other as classmates. And so we'll spend a little bit of time looking at those. So Kate is going to put those lessons in the chat, I think.
There.
Okay. Oh, sorry. What did you say?
I think they should be there. And I also wanted to ask if it's okay if people ask questions by unmuting or putting them in the chat while you're talking.
Yes, I would love that. I still have not learned how to feel comfortable with Zoom meetings when people are just looking at me and not interacting with me. My work with teachers is usually very interactive. So yes, please feel free to unmute at any time or type in the chat if you have questions. So thumbs up, does everybody have those files from the chat? It should be 2 lessons. One is called, oh, looks like we're getting a request to resend them. So one is a LEAF lesson called Unlocking a Forest Past, and it should be a PDF. And then the other is a project learning tree lesson called Monitoring Forest Health. And that should be a PDF as well. So yes, thumbs up from folks. We have it. All right, cool. So again, just let's really briefly, we'll talk about them and then we'll get a little time to discuss. I want you to open the one that is called Field Enhancement 1, Unlocking a Forest Past. And it is from the LEAF 4th grade manual here. So here's what the lesson looks like in the paper copy. It's from LEAF's 4th grade manual, and high school and middle school teachers don't panic because I'm saying 4th grade. The lesson is written at that level, but it is totally doable for any other grade level. You might want to tweak the directions. You might want to ramp up what kind of questioning and conversations you're having, but the actual activities themselves are flexible for any grade. So what this one does is it outlines some ways for your students to really look in depth at the forest around them. And that could be just the trees on your school grounds. It could be your actual school forest. Or if you have students who are home learning individually at home, it could just be their backyard. So even though we're talking about forest, it really is applicable to whatever space or place that they're finding themselves in. So it gives some ways for students to think more deeply about what's going on in that forest. So instead of just thinking about the ecology or the forest in terms of like what's going on there with habitat, this time we're going to be thinking about the history of that place. So if you look at the activity, LEAF lessons are set up with all the introduction and everything like that, and then they have actual student pages are look differently. So if you could kind of scroll through that activity on your screen and find the actual student pages. I don't know if yours have page numbers or not, but if they do, it would be like 152. Anyways, you'll see that it looks kind of like a worksheet. And I want you to look at the sorts of things that the worksheet is guiding students to look for. So we are looking at evidence of people that were here in the past. So things like rock piles, broken glass, trees growing in rows, maybe some rusty barbed wire, those sorts of things. That if you're out walking in a park somewhere or walking in the school forest and you come across those things and you say, oh, I wonder what that's from. those are evidence of people using that forest in the past. And it could be past 20 years ago, or it could be past more than 100 years ago. It really depends on the place that you're in. So again, if you look at that page, it gives you some specific things to watch for. If you are doing this with older students, you might want to rewrite it because the cartoon look of the lesson might irritate older kids a little bit, but you still are going to be giving them that same guidance. So same specific things to be looking for. And then we start looking at what are evidence of people using this today, people in the present using that forest. So on the next page, everything's from simple things like signs and benches to litter. It's kind of hard, unfortunately, to be in any kind of forest public place and not see some kind of litter, but that's evidence of people using that forest today. So again, a list of things to be looking for to help us understand how people use it in the current day. The next thing, which is on the same page, is my favorite part of this lesson, and it's aging trees, but it is a really simple way of aging trees using just their circumference, which you then convert to diameter, and the type of tree that it is to kind of estimate how old that tree is. And so the way that that works is we use a growth factor, and you're going to actually flip back a couple pages now in the lesson. There's a chart that says growth factors, and it's just a multiplication using kind of an estimate of how fast each type of tree grows to give you an estimate of how old that tree is. And I'm talking a lot. I hope everyone's following me here. Make sure you interrupt if you're not sure what I'm talking about. But again, we're looking at that growth factors chart. And so, for instance, if we measured a black oak tree, for instance, you can find that on your chart. You see that its growth factor is 4. So let's say we measured it at a 12-inch diameter. What would its approximate age be if the growth factor for a black oak is 4? I have screen silence. I can't share my screen right now. I don't have it up. I don't have the lesson up, but we can go, if somebody else, Steve or Kate, wants to have the lesson on their screen and share that screen, we can do that.
Yeah, let me,
Do you want me to?
Oh, do you have them both up, Steve?
Yeah, well, I've got what she's talking about on this lesson here. Let me.
Yeah, do you want to pull that up? Okay, in the meantime, somebody is thinking about it. If the growth factor for a black oak is 4 and we measured it, there we go, and we measured it at a diameter of 12 inches, how old approximately would that tree be? Somebody can just unmute themselves and shout it out.
48 years.
Yeah, so that would give us an estimate of that tree being 48 years old. Let's say that same tree, looking at the chart, let's say that same tree was an aspen at not the same tree, excuse me. Let's say that our tree was an aspen at that same size, that same 12-inch diameter. How old would that tree be? Let's try to get a different shouter outer this time. So how old would an aspen be if it was 12 inches?
24.
All right, 24 years. So why would 2 trees of the same size be so different in age? And again, I'm hoping for some feedback here. Why would 2 trees of the same size be such a different age? There's a big hint in our chart. What do you think? So we're talking about an aspen being half the age of an oak tree at the same size. What do you think growth factor means?
How much sun it gets?
That would definitely be related, right? And so that's a factor that would come into play, and why we're saying an approximate tree age, right? But what else? What else do we think might be different between a black oak and an aspen tree?
The rate of growth.
The rate of growth, right? So what the growth factor means, how fast that particular kind of tree grows. So does that mean that we think an aspen tree grows faster or slower than a red oak tree? Looking at our chart and what we just calculated for its approximate age. All right, I see in the chat that Alexander says faster. So an aspen tree grows faster than an oak tree does. So even though it gets to be the same size, it's only going to be half the age. Okay, so if we're doing this lesson or this activity with students and they're out in their backyard or their school forest, and they're doing this, measuring trees and estimating how old they are, what is the point of that? What can they do with that information? And Steve, if you wanna kind of flip to back to the student page that has this at the bottom. So while Steve is, thank you. So while Steve is doing that, what is the point of having students do this? What can they learn right there? Yep, scroll up just a little bit. There it is. What can students learn about a place by thinking about how old the trees are there? What do we think? Let's get some guesses either in the chat or with unmuting. Any guesses of what students could, oh, I think I just saw something in the chat, but it went away. Any guesses of what students could learn?
Becky,
Human
growth rate leads into soil quality, human impact.
Human impact, right. The soil quality thing, I think, is going back to my last question of why the trees would be different. Really, really good point there. Human impact, right? So again, we're looking at the history of a place. Have humans been using those trees? Have humans been replanting them, those trees, right? That would be some of the things that we could learn about a place by looking at how old the trees are there. And if you look at that little picture that Steve has on his screen of even aged versus uneven aged, that is another example. So if all of our trees in a place are all the same age, that tells us that they probably were planted at the same time, right? That they were cut and then replanted, or that maybe it had been a farm that has been growing over into forest or something like that. If the trees are uneven aged, that suggests a very different use pattern, right? Those trees weren't all planted at the same time. Maybe it's a more natural forest or it's managed in a different way. So being able to have this simple estimate of how old a tree is really gives us a good fun thing to do with students for thinking about the use of that forest. And then if you go on in the activity, and we won't go into depth with this, but there's the next page, if Steve wants to scroll, gives you another category of sorts of things to look for that are all about disturbances. So we looked at how humans used it in the past. We looked at how humans are using it today. We looked at the age of the forest, and now these things are having us look at disturbances in the forest. And some of those are human caused and some of them are natural. So when students are able to do this and kind of put it all together, they can make a mental picture of what the history of that place is, the history of that forest. And you really can combine this with looking at aerial photos, either current day aerial photos, maybe past aerial photos. And amazingly, it's actually possible to get pretty old aerial photos of a lot of places. You can also get online, you can get the historical survey information from when Wisconsin was originally surveyed way back, and you can read those descriptions and kind of compare them to what the students gather from their own little research and see how things have changed. Okay, so I said that this activity was good for getting a connection to their place, which I think you can see. But I also said it was going to be one about connection to each other through like teamwork. So Steve, I think you can probably skip the screen share now at this point so we can see each other's faces again. And let's just get a couple of ideas for how you could administer this lesson to really facilitate teamwork. And I want to hear from both the perspective of I have my students in my class and also the perspective of, well, my kiddos are all out at their own homes doing this from their own backyard. So let's do a little brainstorming about that. How could you use this activity to facilitate teamwork with your students? And I talked a lot, so I don't want to talk for a few minutes. I want to hear you all talking if you can. So thoughts on how you could use this as a team building activity.
You could use a shared Google map and kind of figure out like where the human impact is around. I'm speaking from virtual, by the way.
Okay.
From like use a shared Google map where students could input like what the forest area is like near their home, and then kind of look throughout the district.
Okay, so they would all be inputting their data on the same document, you're saying?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I like that. Just out of curiosity, to bring back the idea of making sure we all take screen breaks, you would want to make sure that they were not, in that instance, that they were not entering their data while they were in the field, right? So that they're out there having that screen break, really just getting their data through observation and not through that digital interaction at that time. Okay, good. What else? Rachel, were you unmuting for a second, or you just popped on your picture? Okay. Other thoughts on how we could use this to facilitate team building? What if you were in class together? What if you did have your students actually working side by side? What ways would this data collection and observation activity facilitate teamwork? Or what are some tweaks you could do to it to make that easier?
I feel like there might be some differences in observation. And so just kind of talking through, like maybe one person noticed a barbed wire fence and one person didn't, or maybe the data is a little bit different. And so I think talking through some of those differences is a really good team skill, where you learn how to like actually talk to people about how their perspective might be different and their data collection might be different.
Yeah, absolutely. And the tree ID portion of the aging of the trees is a great opportunity for that too. If you've ever been in a workshop with me, you've probably done tree ID, because it's my favorite thing in the world for student discourse. Having those conversations of, well, I think it looks like, and if you look here at the key, it says those sorts of conversations are really, really great for what Kate just mentioned. Good. You can also consider splitting up what they're looking for. So one student is looking for evidence of disturbance, while another student is looking for the evidence of past use, and then they have to come together and share that data. All right, cool. Questions or comments about the idea of looking into the history of a place instead of just the ecology, as we so often do? So any other ways you would change this activity, or where would you fit it in what you're doing before we move on? All right, then we're going to move on. The next one, we're going to be really quick because I know I'm kind of overgoing my time. But the other one should also be a PDF that I think Kate dropped in the chat. And it's called Monitoring Forest Health. And you're really lucky because, as you might know, project learning tree activities aren't usually just given out outside of a workshop, but this one I have permission to share. This is, I think I've used the word favorite like 8 times just in the last 10 minutes, but this is another one of my favorite things to do with students. Monitoring Forest Health is definitely written for a high school audience. So if you have younger students, you're going to be doing the backwards thing from what we just did in the last one. You might want to tone down the level of the directions and the level of the questioning. But it is a series of data collection and observations that students are making in a forest plot. And again, we can adapt this to be talking about backyard. I've done this in like open parks before. I've done it in full-fledged school forests. You can do it anywhere. It's a series of conditions that students are looking for or looking at in their forest. And then they're using all of that data to analyze overall what the health of that forest plot is. It's super, super fun. Some of it does need a few tools, but most of it is either completely toolless or can use things like popsicle sticks. So very, very quickly, because I know I don't have much time, if you follow along with me starting from this page, I don't know if you can see that on my little iPad. Oh, we're getting a comment in the chat too. And if we want to share screen again, maybe that might be a more efficient way to do this. But I'm just going to really quickly talk through the different sets of data that they're collecting. In tree and crown condition, they're looking at just what it sounds like, the condition of the trees. So that is one that students can do alone. Yep, and then just keep scrolling down, Steve, till you get to the student pages. Thank you, or Kate, or whoever's sharing. So tree and crown condition is a very easy one for students to do alone if they have to. So if they're at home and looking at their own backyard, that's an easy one that they don't need any special tools for. The next page is forest diversity.
Sorry,
And
I had to stop sharing for just a second.
oh, that's okay. Forest diversity is based on looking at how many different types of tree species there are, but you do not need to know tree ID to do this. You really can just look at the qualitative differences in the trees. So if your students don't know what this tree's name is and this tree's name is, that is totally fine. They can just look at what do they notice about the differences. So that is one that students can do on their own if they have to. I'm skipping ahead. Like in abundance is not one that students can easily do on their own. So if you have students working from home, I would suggest you skip like in abundance. It's possible, but it would be a little trickier. Soil quality is the same. It's possible, but it would be tricky for students to do alone. If you're in the classroom, absolutely go for it. But if you're having students do this in their backyard, you might want to skip soil. Regeneration is totally easy, although as a heads up, you can't do that one in the winter if you have any snow cover because you're not going to be able to see some of your seedlings. So that regeneration looks at, are the trees coming back? And then snags and coarse woody debris your students can do. So you're looking at what's the difference between a snag and coarse woody debris, by the way? What do I mean when I say snags? Rachel.
Standing dead tree.
Standing dead trees. So what do you think coarse woody debris is then? If a snag is standing dead tree.
On the ground.
On the ground, the stuff that has already fallen, right? Either large branches or the trees themselves have fallen. Good. And so that is an easy one for students to do. And then wildlife, which is always really fun, looking for signs of wildlife, even in the winter. So Steve or whoever's sharing their screen is scrolling through. Like I mentioned, a lot of these you could do with students who are at home without any special tools or anything like that. But I would encourage you again to give them that time to be out there without interacting with the device. So please don't switch this to a fillable PDF or anything like that. Just, guide them into having a clipboard or some paper or something that they're writing on. That 100 grid transparency is the one that you're going to skip. So give the students that chance to get out in nature and really make those deep observations, things that they're not normally looking for when they're just out in the forest, that will help them kind of see things with a new lens. And then the next time they're out at the park or out at the school forest or whatever it might be, they're going to notice those dead branches on the tree, or they're going to notice the, hey, look at how many seedlings there are here in this spot. There's a lot of regeneration. Little things that they maybe wouldn't otherwise be noticing in a just plain old nature walk. And so again, we don't need to have the conversation again because I took so much time. I'm sorry, Kate. But again, you can do this a lot of different ways to have them having those conversations together, sharing the data that they each had. Make sure you're giving them time to get into some of the analysis, that argument stuff, the scientific discourse that we were talking about earlier. Well, I thought it was this and I think it's this. Let them hash that out. But really good for teamwork in that sense. And then this page that we're on right now that Steve is showing you is the, we just went past it, but that's the one where you're ultimately deciding on the condition of that forest. Is it a healthy forest or not a healthy forest? The page right above that one. And so again, you can have them decide on their own and then make their case to each other, or you can have them decide together and come to a conclusion together. So it's a lot of fun, gets you and your students out in the woods and away from the screen, and is very, very, very adaptable. So questions about that before I mute myself, finally. We can turn off the screen share if you want, Steve, and see each other's faces again. Any other questions or concerns or ideas on that one?
I did want to read a comment, though now my chat went away, from Becky on your last lesson. She just says,
Yeah.
History of trees could have students, you could have parents pair up with parents or grandparents who know the history of an area and talk about how the area with trees has changed over time. Get more people outside interacting together and assessing an area together. And I really like that intergenerational component too. So
yeah. And I mentioned going back to the survey results, but don't stop there, right? Go back into what is the what do the indigenous people of that area have in their oral history of that place, right? How do they describe the forest uses of your place, even before the surveyors or during or after the surveyors made their notes? Yeah, I love that intergenerational piece. Cool idea.
One thing I used to do with high school students, not with that particular lesson, but with similar lessons, is have each group of students, have the students divided up, and one group would be the soil expert, one group would be the lichen expert, and then they would teach the other people in their particular field of expertise, and that saves time too.
Yeah,
you can
it
go
makes
back
it
to
more
the classroom.
Definitely. Or you can just revisit it. Maybe once a month you go back out and you look at a new condition or whatever it might be. Yeah, what you just described, I can't remember who it was, but somebody does that with high school students teaching the younger students in each of those condition groups. Yeah. Anything else?
Cool. Well, thanks so much, Nicole. I loved the connections between math and science and history and all sorts of different subjects. And I think that emphasis that you put on letting people be away from screens is really important. So thanks for that. And that's a great lead into our next couple of guests. So if you're all finished up, I'll be transitioning to Becky Workus and Tristan Workus.